Briefing. Ooh, there we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first seasonal briefing for media. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Emilie-Jeanne, and I work with the Department of Community Services with Government of Yukon, Protective Services, and I'm going to be your moderator today. First, some housekeeping notes. If you're joining us on Zoom, please keep your mic muted. This briefing is being recorded and will be made available to the public on YouTube later this week. That includes the media Q&A. If we have any problems during this briefing with Zoom spammers, or if the meeting is otherwise compromised, we will end the meeting and restart it. So please rejoin using the same link. We'll be hearing from all three of our speakers today and then taking questions at the end with time for at least one question and one follow-up question per outlet. And I'll start with the media in the room and then go to the Zoom. Today, we'll be hearing from Minister of Community Services, Cory Bellmore. We will also hear a short briefing from EJ Bercier, hydrologist with Water Science and Stewardship, which is the new name of the Water Resources branch, in case you were wondering, and Greg Blackjack, director of the Emergency Measures Organization. We'll be sharing early season information about flood outlook, some reminders about preparedness, and what we've been working on this winter and spring. In late April, we'll be hosting a second media briefing once the spring flood risk assessment has been released. This will provide a more detailed outlook for floods and wildfires with forecasters back to answer questions. But for now, let's get started. First, Minister Bellmore.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be joining you today on the traditional territory of the Kwanlundan and Tawakwachin Council. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Cory Bellmore. I'm the Minister of Community Services. We are here today to provide you with the first seasonal briefing of the year from the Government of Yukon. Thank you for coming here and joining us today. The Government of Yukon is committed to keeping communities safe and modernizing emergency preparedness, response, and disaster recovery in the long term. Much work has been done over the last several years of flooding incidents, from responding, planning, and assessing to physical alterations on the land and shores to reduce impacts of flooding incidents. So I'd like to thank all those involved, from the property owners to the emergency responders that took part in all that work. As we look ahead to this spring, we're interested to hear about the snowpack and how it could influence water levels in many communities. This briefing is the first of several to keep you updated and informed about the latest conditions and our best efforts to assess the risks. Government officials are working with community partners, municipalities, First Nations, and unincorporated areas to make sure we're all as prepared as can be and well coordinated for the next few months. Our government is also continuing to develop official flood hazard maps for high-risk communities across the territory. Maps have already been completed for Carcross, Tagish, Marsh Lake, Lake LaBarge, Carmacks, Teslin, Old Crow, and there's draft maps for Dawson, Klondike Valley, and the Upper Liard. They're also available to review as well. These maps will help local governments and residents reduce flood risk and make informed planning decisions for communities. This is important work, and I look forward to sharing more about it in the coming weeks. They can be viewed, I believe, on the Flood Hub website. If you search Yukon Flood Hub, it'll take you there. An important piece about emergencies and your personal response to it is about the personal preparedness. So before you hear from our officials, I'll share a quick reminder about emergency preparedness. Know your risks, make an emergency plan, and put together an emergency kit. Get these ready before you need them. If you already have them in place, it'll reduce the stress during an actual emergency, and it'll also help the emergency responders. This spring, Community Services will be sharing more information about emergencies in the Yukon and what you can do to keep your family safe and ready. And for more information on how to prepare an emergency kit, how to make an emergency plan for your household or animals, and disaster recovery, visit preparedyukon.ca or speak to your local government. Now over to you guys.
Thank you, Minister Bellmore. Good morning, everyone. I'm EJ Bercier. I'm a hydrologist with the Water Science and Stewardship branch. And I'll be providing today an overview of snow conditions on the land where we currently see a higher potential for spring flooding and where to find important information. So by March 1st, we typically have 85 to 90% of total winter snowpack on the ground. And we speak of the snowpack in terms of snow water equivalent, or SWE. So for the less initiated, we measure that in percent of normal, so where it fits among the historical or normal range. And we also speak to it in millimeters, just like we speak of rain. And in forecasting, that's important because it transfers well from one to the other. The surveyed snowpack currently ranges from average to well above average across the territory. And the highest relative snowpack is in the Teslin Big Salmon region. So to start off with the snowpack of note, the Teslin Big Salmon region is well above normal. Snowpack is well above normal as of March 1st. And so that means that the community faces a higher risk of freshet flooding, and that's based on spring weather patterns and rain on snow events to come, of course. Lake levels typically crest in mid to late June, and the area is mostly impacted by spring heat and precipitation rather than summertime weather events, such as we see in the southern lakes. So a little bit different over the Teslin Basin. The current snowpack is approximately 20% lower than the peak snowpack we saw in 2022 that led to moderate flooding in the region. So we're keeping our eyes on that region and on that snowpack. And then the Teslin snowpack has an influence, strong influence rather, on the Yukon River at Carmacks. And so because we're seeing a high snowpack both in the Teslin River Basin as well as in the upper Yukon River Basin, we're considering that there is a moderate flood risk or higher than normal flood risk for Carmacks because there is also a higher than average snowpack in the central Yukon Basin. For the Liard and Upper Liard region, they're well above normal snowpack in the watershed suggests spring freshet flow volumes will be well above normal. And of course, weather conditions in March and April will determine the most probable spring scenario. Higher snowpacks have failed to produce flooding in the past without an added input, such as a rain on snow event. So spring conditions and summer conditions will really determine what we see in that region. And then for the Klondike Valley, we have an above normal snowpack in the watershed combined with above normal winter flows in the Klondike River, which suggests spring freshet flow volumes will be well above normal. We are waiting for the upcoming April 1st snow surveys as well as ice thickness measurements to really determine what the ice jam risk is for the Klondike. The Southern Lakes snowpack is above normal in the lower basin, but the high elevation mountain snowpack is much closer to normal, like you see in the central figure. And while the above normal snowpack increases flood potential for the Southern Lakes, the timing of snowmelt, summer precipitation, and glacial melt act together equally to drive flooding in the basin. So that makes flood potential more uncertain for the Southern Lakes compared to other communities. We have consistently below average water levels in Marsh Lake. That's been the case throughout the winter. So that indicates lower groundwater levels reinforced by real-time monitoring. So that tells us there's a bit more storage in the lake for inflows come spring. Based on snowpack alone, the risk of flooding is average for the Southern Lakes. And you can find information throughout the year and more specifically during the active season on the Flood Hub. As Minister Bellmore indicated, we have the current situation page, which we update on a weekly basis, and then we'll switch to daily updates during active advisories. So you can find current conditions as well as forecasted conditions on that page, and you can navigate to it through the main Flood Hub portal, which takes you to forecasting, active advisories, as well as data. And you can also review flood maps on that Flood Hub portal. This is where the current flood advisories will be displayed as points on the map with a link to a PDF document that can be interacted with. So that's where you'll find the advisories once they come out live as needed. And the flood advisories will look something like this. Flood warnings, watches, and advisories will be issued through the Yukon Flood Hub. And we work closely with the Emergency Measures Organization and emergency coordination groups in the lead up to advisory issuance to exchange information. And then based on evolving conditions, EMO may issue evacuation alerts or orders associated with certain flood advisories. Here we have the Data Explorer, which is a new tool that we're offering where Yukoners can really dig into the data as much as they like. And then we have the Water Conditions app, which displays more of a situational awareness piece for snow, water levels, and flows. So in summary, the March snowpack is average to well above average across the Yukon. High snowpack increases the flood risk for these communities: Teslin, Carmacks, Upper Liard, and Klondike Valley. Early season flood potential forecasts will be issued in mid-April once we have the peak snowpack data as well as ice thickness values. And of course, the timing and progression of snowmelt and precipitation are critical drivers of flooding, regardless of snowpack conditions. And again, you can find all the information at floods.service.yukon.ca, which brings you to the Flood Hub. Thank you.
Thank you, EJ. And just before we pass it on to Greg, I'll say that I will email the slides around afterwards. So if you're after a particular graph or slide, just come up to me afterwards or shoot me an email and I can get those to you.
Thank you. My name is Greg Blackjack. I'm the Director of Emergency Measures Organization for Yukon Government. And I'm going to speak to you today on our preparations for this season's spring flood season. The Emergency Measures Organization coordinates Yukon Government's preparedness, response, and recovery for major emergencies. And like you heard today, we're a little bit early, but we're gathering data, collecting all the information we can to be prepared for situations that may result in flooding in our communities. So another office we work closely with is ECCC, Environment and Climate Change Canada, for weather forecasts. And our early reports from them, and it's very early for weather forecasts and predictions, but March and April looking colder than normal and moving into a hot, dry May. So those are things that we calculate when we're looking at flood risk. So as you heard about the snowpack, and as we move into spring, we're looking at a higher flood risk for both the communities of Teslin, Upper Liard, and the Klondike Valley. We're also keeping a close eye on Carmacks and Southern Lakes as our snow breaks up and we go into melt. Mayo and Old Crow areas are looking closer to normal, but they're always on our radar as well, especially for things like ice breakup and ice jam flooding. So I'll start today talking about government preparedness. And as you know, each municipal government and First Nation governments have their own emergency plans or combined plans. And we work with those governments to update their plans and provide supports where needed, and linking those governments to expert advice like you heard here today. So they're working with the best info to support their communities. EMO has emergency planners that go out to the communities and assist with this work, and they also assist with training and tabletop exercises to help those communities prepare for eventual situations when needed. We try to have an emergency planner present in all communities when these training sessions or updates to planning are going on. Over this past season, we've been in Dawson working with the city and Trondequitchin First Nation. We've been out to Marsh Lake, Mount Lauren, and a lot of work with Mayo around the risks of the Wareham Dam this past season. We also take part in training across the Yukon when it's put on by other organizations as invited by our municipalities or First Nation governments. EMO is also part of the Whitehorse Regional Working Group. This is a large group of emergency responders and different partners like Quinlan First Nation, Tonquitchan Council, Emergency Medical Services, RCMP. All of the typical first response players are part of this large emergency management working group that plans and prepares for situations that may affect Whitehorse. And over this past year, EMO has put on a fair amount of training opportunities, mainly in the incident command system for YG staff and our response partners. This past winter, we had 7 different offerings of ICS 200 courses, which trained 79 staff. And we had 3 ICS 300 courses involving 38 staff. And we continue to offer our courses online through the organizational development branch. This training is available to our partner agencies and other governments. Consistent training and shared training with our partners allows us to work more efficiently and more effectively together, and just supports coordination across governments throughout the Yukon when supporting each other. Now, emergency response preps for the year. Like I mentioned earlier, when there's an above average snowpack or a higher flood potential in the spring for a community, we identify those communities and reach out and work with them directly, making sure they understand the risk. One of the things we've done in previous seasons and will continue to do is pre-positioning our flood equipment around the Yukon in strategic locations, whether it's highway camps or volunteer fire departments, to make sure that our equipment is readily available and ready to be deployed quickly to help out affected communities. So looking at Carmacks and Teslin, these are communities that have dealt with flooding before and have had recent experiences. Some longer term mitigations have been completed, but some are still planning and in the construction phase. Based on past experience and new tools that we have at our disposal, like the flood maps for different areas across the Yukon, it helps us plan and prepare communities and identify areas to install our temporary mitigations. So if flooding does occur, we will work closely with local governments and partner agencies and unorganized, unincorporated areas to help keep Yukoners safe and minimize the impacts to our infrastructure. In addition to this briefing and briefing governments directly, we are hosting we're still pretty early and we're still pretty frozen. So the big deciding factor that we have now is our spring warm up and how our weather pans out. And another reminder just about personal preparedness. Yukoners have an important role in preparing their homes and properties for flooding, wildfires, or other risks they may face. This spring, we'll be running an emergency preparedness campaign through April and May, including radio and print, social media ads, leading into National Emergency Preparedness Week, the first week of May. At this time, we'll also be testing the Alert Ready system, which is tested biannually, and that's our broadcast system that allows us to get emergency info out instantly to Yukoners when needed. We'll share information to help Yukoners prepare themselves and their families for emergencies, including putting together a 72-hour kit, creating an emergency plan, and tips on protecting your property from floods and fires. And all of this info can be found on preparedyukon.ca. But for now, the biggest message that we're bringing is to prepare your properties for spring melt. So things you can do on your personal property to ensure your house has a good spring melt is clearing snow 3 to 5 feet away from your home's foundation, clearing your eaves troughs, downspouts, and drains of all blockages, clear any ice dams so water can flow away from your house, and extending your downspouts away from your foundation. If you live in a flood-prone area, install a sump pump or ensure your sump pump's working, and a water alarm in your basement. Check your basement drains aren't blocked. And if you are in a prone area, lifting any appliances in a basement or off the ground onto blocks is a good idea to keep them out of any possible flooding. And be ready to install flood barriers around low-lying assets that can't be relocated. Also understand where your valuables and important items are stored to ensure that they're not prone to flooding and you're able to grab them if you need them. Another important piece is understanding your home insurance policy and what it does and doesn't cover in flooding. Sewer septic backup, overland, or groundwater flooding may be add-ons to a policy and may require an extra cost. So with that, looking ahead, we'll be working with our partners and other governments to ensure that Yukoners are safe and communities are prepared as best we can for the upcoming spring. All of our emergency info can be found at www.yukon.ca/emergencies. And this will provide links, as said, to Flood Hub, 511, and other emergency info. And Yukoners can also follow us on Facebook at Yukon Protective Services. We have printed emergency material. It's our little yellow booklets that is available through our office and through most municipal offices. And yeah, we'll be providing further updates later in April once we have more assessment and information on the snowpack. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much to our 3 speakers today. That concludes the presentations, and now we're going to be heading towards media questions and answers. We're going to start with the media in the room, which is CBC at the moment. And Mike, do we have anyone on the... And then we'll be moving to people who are joining us via Zoom. So Tim will kindly circulate the mic. There's going to be 1 question and then 1 follow-up question per outlet, and then we'll move to the next outlet. And then if we've got time at the end, which we probably will, we'll come back to another round of questions. Callie first from CBC.
If a lake or river does start to flood, what is the lead time in terms of like letting the community know and, you know, getting some kind of response happening? I'm not sure if this is a George or an EJ question.
Might be a
Or
coordinated
Greg,
approach.
sorry.
Well, so depending on the flood mechanism, so whether that's an ice jam or a flood from freshet, approximately a week prior to the ice beginning to move, the Water Science and Stewardship Branch will set out an ice advisory, which means that residents can expect water levels to rise rapidly and suddenly at any point in time during that time period. And then as required within 24 hours, typically we will set out a flood watch. And then if it comes to more of an emergency situation where we set out a flood watch, then we will display that on the Flood Hub in coordination with EMO.
Yeah, and the communities of concern will be meeting with us regularly at those times. And the big thing for them is just making sure that their citizens understand what those advisories and watches mean and how to get prepared, and sort of giving them those time windows as well, based on conditions and what we're looking at.
Sounds good. I don't have a follow-up.
Okay. Mike, any questions from the Zoom?
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's go to Megan with CC.
At this point, I know it's early, but with this high snowpack, what do you think? How do you think ahead to the fire season? Like, could this be good for the fire season? Is it just a guessing game at this point? We got to get through flood season first.
Yes, we definitely have to get through flood season first. Conditions are assessed differently for the fire risk, and we have to wait and see how we melt and how we dry out. So a quick, hot, dry spring probably brings more dangerous fire conditions, but we're still a little early on that. So our experts at Wildland Fire are following all of those variables.
I'm just wondering for CarMax, I know there is history of flooding in the area. What water body floods? Is it the Yukon River or is it the Norden's Goldie River? Can you tell me?
They can both be a cause of flooding. The Nordenskjöld typically floods from ice jamming. So we see that earlier on in May, depending on, if we get a really rapid onset of freshet, then we see the ice lifting and causing jamming. Whereas for the, River Drive area, that's more of a Yukon River flood mechanism during freshet a bit later on.
Okay, are there any questions from the Zoom? If so, yeah, please just okay, great. Marine, just unmute your mic, please, and just speak your question.
Hi. Have you already, maybe you have addressed that and I missed it, but have you considered the dam on the Yukon River for the Southern Lakes?
So the question was about the impacts of the Whitehorse Dam on Southern Lakes flooding. So I'm going to give that one to EJ.
Mm-hmm. Sure. It's certainly a big factor that we look at, although Yukon Energy Corporation operates and manages water levels flowing through the Yukon, the Whitehorse Rapids generating station. So they base their forecasts using the snow data that we provide to them, using 8 different snow course points as well as real-time data. So YEC is really the main operator who considers the snow pack in terms of an operational data point.
Does anyone else have anything to add on to that one before we move on? Nope. Okay, great. Marine, do you have a follow-up question?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And do we know who CDP is and whether they have a question? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the room for another round of questions from CBC, and then I'll go back to the Zoom but yeah, before wrapping up.
If a flood happens, how quickly can sandbags and whatnot get there as needed?
Well, with all of the info we're getting for water conditions, we'll be strategically placing that stuff to get it out as fast as possible. We've had requests already for sandbags, but it's a little early to start filling those. As we see risk, we'll move our supplies in the correct locations. So working with our partners in the community governments, First Nation governments, and then across YG, HPWs, running stuff up the highway all the time. So they'll move our equipment pretty fast.
Why is it too early? Like, what's the risk of, is it just like then you put it there and then it doesn't get used and it's a waste? Is that it? Or?
Well, you got to find the sand and you got to find a place to fill it. You got to keep it out of the water so it doesn't rot. There's a lot of variables.
Thanks.
Thanks, Callie. Great questions. Anything from Megan?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you mentioned work with the community of Mayo around risks at the Mayo Dam. Can you tell me, I know that the spillway is damaged. What are the risks there right now for the community?
The risk for the community would be failure of the spillway. So they're monitoring.
Risk of how likely is that to happen with the damage?
I don't have those numbers in front of me right now, but we are working with the community. We're working with Yukon Energy. on providing a plan that allows up-to-date info and early warning and monitoring for the community. So part of Yukon Energy's water license is to have an emergency plan in place in coordination with the community and any response partners. So that's the work I'm talking about.
Okay, thanks.
I just trying to figure out what question to ask. What would be the risk if this spillway failed? What would that look like for the people who live around there?
That planning is done with Yukon Energy and the community, and they're planning egress routes out, timing, amount of time to get certain areas of the population out, as well as notifying further up the highway. So Keno, Elsa, those areas, and also identifying high ground areas. So if you're caught on the opposite side of a dam failure, they know where for people to stage.
Okay, thanks. Marion, do you have another question from the Zoom before we wrap up?
Yes, please. I have two questions, but start with one. So considering that it depends on weather, I understood that it depends somewhere from summer weather and some other with the like at which rate the snow will melt. But do you have a range of when approximately those potential floods would happen? Are we looking at like June or more like late summer?
Thank you, Marianne, for the question. Depending on the body of water that tends to flood or have impacts, you'll see different reactions based on what the flood mechanism is. So for smaller rivers such as the Klondike and the Nordenskjold, you'll see ice jam flooding earlier on during the flood season, and the flood season can range from mid-April into September, October, depending on whether you're looking at a small stream or a large lake. So that's typically the flood season, but earlier on for ice jam flooding impacted streams, and then larger rivers such as the Teslin and Yukon River react to freshet both locally and at higher alpine elevations. So that typically, around solstice, late June to July is when we see peaks on those rivers. And then the southern lakes see a reaction from snow melt, glacier melt, and summer precipitation closer to August.
Thank you. It's kind of a follow-up with that. Can I ask that other question?
Yeah, go for it.
Yep. Is there already some emergency funds planned for affected residents, or are you waiting to? That's why I was asking for the timeline. Like, are you waiting that there will be floods to make emergency funds available? Like in the past, there was some made, but they were done they were available more in the early winter, or are you trying to make those funds available for maybe mitigation before the floods happen? I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah, no, that was clear. I think that's a question for Greg. For Greg, thanks.
We don't have a budget for any mitigation projects for homeowners. That's why we try to provide as much information on personal preparedness as we can. Give people a chance to prepare as much as they can and understand what is available to them. That's why I spoke about house insurance today. House insurance, it's very important you understand what your policy covers and also what you could access that you may not be aware of, specific to flooding. Any other economic impacts from an event, we'll assess at that time whether there's any funding programs available.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much to everyone who attended the briefing today. As we said, we'll be holding another one in April, where we'll have a fuller picture of what the water data is telling us, and hopefully the weather data as well, as we get closer to the spring melt and breakup. Thank you very much, Minister Bellmore, EJ Bercier, Greg Blackjack. Before we close things off, I just want to invite any further final comments from our speakers.
I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today and the department for doing the work they need to help people be prepared for the season as we move forward. And just keep an eye out for what's happening in and around your properties. And if you see anything unusual, just let us know. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here today. Take care.
Thank you.